So this right here is the Chick Cozy incubator that I got. I had some styrofoam incubators my aunt had given me that I've used for a very long time, but I noticed that the humidity and temperature had a lot of cold and hot spots, and where the humidity was high on certain sides and low on others, and it just wasn't functioning properly. So I switched to this incubator, and I've had a huge uptake in hatching. So I'm really glad for that. And so what I do is I put my chicken eggs in here for 21 days, and then on day 18, I've been stopping the egg turner and just laying them all flat in the bottom. So these little egg turners right here, the orange cups that the eggs are sitting in, those are removable, and then I can just lay the eggs at the bottom. So today what I'm doing is looking at the eggs to see which one's viable. I don't know how well you can see it, but up here it says there are 8 days left. That's about to turn to 7 because of the time of day that I put the eggs in. So really, if you come over here, this shows kind of what they should look like. So we're about right here, between here and here. And so the egg should be fairly dark at this point, which I've stopped not incubating, but stopped candling them earlier, just because in colored chicken eggs it is so hard to see what's viable right here for me. Sometimes I can, depending on the shade of the egg, but not always. And so I've just been waiting until it's further along between here, or even sometimes really close to hatch when I'm laying them flat, because I do not want to risk throwing out viable eggs just because I can't see them. In duck eggs, they're very porous. You can kind of see all the way through the eggs. Whereas chicken eggs, it's a little bit harder to see through the eggs. So this is kind of my solution to that problem. So one thing I really like about this incubator, and I already have an egg out that I candled before, is that it comes with a candler, so I don't have to worry about sticking the egg on the flashlight. And so with the light on, you can kind of see an example of the egg and seeing through it. And this is where you would see some development or veins in the egg if it was beginning to develop. So it's important to remember here that we're between day 13 and 14 on these eggs. So really the egg should be fairly dark through most of the egg and kind of look like really dark gray. You should see the shadow almost throughout the whole egg, and we're just not seeing that here. And so because I'm candling them on between day 13 and 14 instead of day 7, I know that this egg is not going to be viable. So in some previous videos, I had some concerns from people that are just now starting to candle eggs and incubate for the first time or two, and there was some frustration on when are we throwing the eggs out? Is this the correct time? Am I throwing away viable eggs? If you're incubating later in the game and your eggs are not darker, then you kind of have a really good idea that this egg is not developing. Especially if you set all the eggs at the same time. You're not going to have eggs that just develop a whole lot slower than the rest of the eggs. It makes sense to see an egg further along and know that, hey, this egg should be black all the way down to here, or dark gray. I'm not seeing this shadow all the way down through the egg, so I know something's not right. Also at this stage, a lot of times you can see movement in the eggs, and you can see the veins very well if the egg's developing properly. So this egg is one of my brown speckled eggs, and so I'm kind of showing you here. You can see some shadowing in the egg. It looks like it started to develop at some point. The downside is that that doesn't really continue all the way down. It's not as dark as I like to be, and I'm really not seeing defined veins. This is one of those eggs that may be a little hard to see inside. Usually the easiest eggs to see inside for me for chicken eggs are the cream colored ones. But again, I incubate a ton of duck eggs, and so on those you can see through really well all the way through the egg, and so you can always tell if there's veining or not. or at least for me I can. And so this one's always a challenge because I'm not seeing any veining that I like to see. I do see kind of a shadow. A lot of times I feel like that shadow is just where it's already developed, or like there's a bloodline and some staining from the veins that started but never continued developing. And by the way, on this incubator, after 5 minutes, the light just turns off by itself. And so you just have to hit this up button to start it up again. And so for me, I probably would not keep this egg. I would say, oh, you know, I'm not sure about this one. But if you're ever in doubt, you can leave your eggs in for a little bit longer. Absolutely could. And that way you will know for sure. Because if you get to day 18, let me show you. If you get up here to day 18, where the egg should be pretty much all black, and you're not seeing that, then you know that the egg's not viable. So if you're ever in doubt, just leave it in a little bit longer. The worst thing that can happen is that there's a crack in the egg or something and the egg pops open. That can happen. So something to watch out for. Again, with this egg, you can see that there is a shadow up top, but for most of the egg, there's nothing going on there. It's pretty empty. Here's this egg. Kind of same thing going on. You can see the yolk up top, but there's nothing else happening in the rest of the egg. Pretty much looks empty. There's no veining. So again, this egg is not viable. I've had an issue with a lot of my green eggs just not being viable. I don't know if that's because I have too many hens for my rooster to cover, or if it's because some of the hens stay kind of gone in the woods a lot of the days or running around the property, and the rooster seems to hang out with the same chickens every single day. So you can see this one's also like almost completely clear on the back. So what you're seeing up top is the yolk. And that's pretty much it happening in these eggs. Okay, so this egg is a really great example of what I'm looking for. You can see I've set it on there and it is just dark all the way through. So I know because I'm between day 13 and 14, that egg's supposed to be really dark, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, it is so dark in this egg that I know it is definitely developing. Whereas with, say, this egg, you can see the difference. It's very light. You can see through most of it. So there is a huge difference once you get this far along in what an egg should look like and what should be happening in that egg. So what I'm doing is I actually have this egg container. This side is the eggs that are not viable, and this side is my eggs that I'm candling. This is where I put the viable egg. That way, every 5 eggs, I can candle them and then put the ones that are still healthy back in the incubator. And you can see the difference. See this one? How light it is compared to that one that was completely dark inside. So I know that a lot of times people will candle at 7 days, and I used to do that, but I'm getting to the point where I like this method so much better. It's just easier to tell. So here's another one that's just pretty. When I am hatching my brown eggs, a lot of the time there's a very high rate of fertility. So I'm not sure what's going on with these green ones. And then here you go. There's another egg that's what we want to see. It's very dark all the way through. So there's another viable egg, which is exciting. So just in this short time that I've kind of been incubating, the humidity's gone down to 35%, which it goes back up when I put the lid back on. But I really like to keep my humidity around 55% at this stage. Okay, so here's another egg. You can see it's not quite as dark and shadowy as the other ones, but still doing pretty well at the bottom. So I noticed the top is a little light, which is strange. And the backside is too. But this egg I'm still gonna keep anyways, just because a good portion of it is darker. So maybe the other eggs had started developing just a tiny bit more. But still, this kind of looks like a day 11 or 12 egg. So I don't feel comfortable throwing it out. So when I'm in doubt like that, I just keep the egg just in case. I feel like that's best practice for me. And then here is an egg that is very clearly not developing at all. And so that's kind of how you know. I also have one of the roosters is still fairly young. We have 2 roosters. I have a flock of chickens and my son has a flock of chickens. And his rooster just became into his age and where he started crowing about 2 months ago, and so I'm not sure how fertile he is quite yet, and that could explain some of these eggs because all of those chickens that are with that rooster lay colored eggs, green, blue, grayish colored eggs. And so this one I'm definitely keeping. That looks amazing. So my son's flock of chickens, they kind of keep to themselves for the most part, which is awesome. But that because we have 5 acres, so it's so funny to watch them kind of hang out and do their own thing, especially since the rooster's a little bit younger. See this one. This is such a cool egg. It has a lot of texturing on it. It doesn't, you can't really tell until you shine the light on it, but you can definitely feel it versus seeing it. And then this one, definitely not where we want it to be, so. Some of our hens are also aging a bit, and so I think that plays a bit of a role in the fertility and viability of eggs. So this one is one that I'm also going to keep. You can see that it has a pretty good shadow through most of it. It's not quite as dark as some of the other eggs, but this is definitely dark enough and developed enough that I want to keep it and see what is going to continue happening here. Trying to keep these eggs set up. It's a little bit harder when you are trying to candle them and set them apart from the other eggs. Okay, and so this one too, it's still not as dark as the other eggs, but definitely has a lot of development, and most of the egg is pretty dark, so I'm going to say that this egg is viable enough for me to try to hatch it. So here's another egg. It is very, very dark. I cannot even see any of the veins or development because of how dark it is, which is right where it should be for the stage of development. So I do like to see that. You can see that I'm kind of setting them in the top because we have a lot that are just not viable or developed. And so here's kind of what we're looking at. So we do have 1 young rooster in the flock, and all of my chickens are a minimum of 2 years old, except for the ones that are not laying that I just hatched this year. So they're definitely starting to age a little bit. And then, so this is one that I would say is not viable. You can see kind of where it started to develop and then had stopped at some point. This does happen. This may be a little bit of bacteria in there too. But that egg, I would just say, is not viable for me. And so I'm going to put this over here. If ever in doubt, you can keep your eggs for a little bit longer. And then this one is one that just never developed. So this is how I know my fertility rate is definitely being impacted, because they're just not even developing. And when I crack them open, there's no obvious signs of fertility in the egg whatsoever. So I definitely know something is up with that. See, this one has a little bit of a shadow at the top, but it never developed veins or anything like that. So here's another egg where it does have a yolk there and a bit of a shadow. Maybe had some vein development, but it definitely is not really developing. And then this egg looks pretty good. So again, not quite as dark as some of the eggs, but you can see like here's a bit where it changes color. That's pretty good for about this stage. So that's what I want to see. So last time that I hatched eggs, I had the same issue where all of my brown eggs were developing really, really well, almost every single one of them. But a lot of the green eggs just weren't. And so I'm wondering if because a lot of my green egg layers were already adult hens when I got them, they were already between 18 months and 2 years old, and I've had them for a year at least. So some of them were a little bit older, but at minimum they were 18 months to 2 years old when I got them. And so I know that these hens are aging a bit. And then even my younger hens are at least 18 months old. And look at that. So this one did start developing at one point. So this is kind of where the embryo is, the baby was. You can kind of see it. That's kind of what we look at when we first see the heartbeat. We'll see something that looks like this. Then it'll be like beep, beep. You can kind of see movement where the heart's beating, which is really cool. And then, but it looks like at some point this one did stop developing. And you can kind of see, I like to refer to it as a bloodline. But it really is, it ends up being a red line that comes across like when it stops developing like this. And so this is one that at some point it was viable, but it just did not develop. And then again, every 5 minutes, just got to push that button to turn the light back on. And then, yeah, so nothing's going on there. This is definitely not viable. I do not like seeing like this many eggs that are not viable. These two are still off to candle. This many eggs that are not viable. If I'm not hatching eggs, then my chickens are still laying really well, then I'll try to keep them in the flock. But when it comes to hatching eggs, this can be an issue with keeping older hens. Even if they're laying eggs, their eggs may not be as viable as they were when they were just between 1 and 2 years of age. But also, having a young rooster isn't helping. And then my main rooster does not like to share the girls in his flock. He chases off my son's younger rooster and his hens. And so my big rooster is over about 16 hens. So that may also be an issue. And then, so this is interesting. This one, you can see like this side, there's hardly anything going on whatsoever. But over here, it's a bit dark. Now, it is not nearly as dark as I would like to see. For myself, I'm definitely going to say I am not keeping this egg. But if ever in doubt, feel free to keep the egg a little bit longer. But what I'm seeing here is maybe some development, but it actually looks like a cloud of bacteria happening there. And so I know that if this egg was viable, it no longer is. But it does look like it's just some bacteria building up inside of the egg, which absolutely can happen. We can't see all of the cracks in the egg sometimes. Sometimes you can't even tell an egg's cracked with your naked eye or that bacteria's got in until you set up here and you'll see some of the cracks light up. Now this egg does not have any visible cracks, but it could have gotten wet or a number of things could have happened. So for me, I'm going to say this is not a viable egg. This is likely just bacteria that has built up because it's not nearly as dark as it should be. And on this side, you can see like maybe there was some development at some point, but none further on because this is still very light. And then look at this. This is such a cool egg. It is, it's like a greenish egg. As you can see, like this side, it looks solid, but you can kind of see what I mean by the eggs are a bit porous because when you put it light in, it has such a cool texture.
when I fill this egg, it just feels smooth, and to the naked eye, it just looks like a solid egg. So it's really cool to see what it looks like over the light. Again, there's not any development whatsoever in this egg. It gets confusing because you can see kind of like a cool texture all the way down the egg. Can't really see it in the camera, but this pattern continues all the way down. It's just a lot lighter. Um, but this is definitely not viable. It just didn't develop. I'm gonna have to set some of the lighter colored eggs so you can see the difference in viability in my chickens. And I think that ultimately I'm just going to have to cut my loss and probably take some of the older hens out of the flock for hatching, or at least just not set their eggs and only set the younger girls' eggs. But first, I'm going to have to figure out which chicken lays which egg, because when you have a flock as big as mine, they were mostly adults when you got them. Most of the time, you have no idea who lays what eggs. The only reason I know that the smaller flock of my son's chickens lay lighter colored eggs is because they were separated when they were little from my main flock of chickens. So I know for a fact that they lay colored eggs. Um, and so they were all laying when I got them, but the rooster was so tiny. I thought that he was like a bantam rooster, and it turns out that he was just a baby. And so I thought that was really funny that they had this baby rooster in with all of these hens, and they did not know that they had gotten him with some chickens that they had bought, and so they were like, I don't know what's up with this guy, he's not interested in ladies. And so I just always thought he was a really small rooster for the first like 2 or 3 months we had him. And then I quickly realized as he began aging that, hey, this guy's actually just a baby. And he had some major changes in his feathering and colors between that time. Okay, so that's kind of it. And then I've put the eggs that are viable back in here, I think. Let me just double check. Okay, so this is the one that's not developing. It is an insane amount of eggs that just were not viable in this hatch. I knew there would be because I've had a lot of issues with the greenish eggs not being viable, but to me this is just insane. Um, and while the eggs are beautiful, so they're great to have a colorful egg basket, they're just not great if you want to hatch eggs. Now, I did just get 4 more speckled Sussex chicks, and that's one of my favorite chicks and one that we have the best hatch rate with. So I'm very, very excited for when they start laying, probably next spring, to incubate some of those eggs. So there you can kind of see like the different things, and then once again, see a clear difference. Oh, so here's day 13 or 14 in the egg. And so I will just let these guys go until day 18. And then at day 18, I will go ahead and I will put them on lockdown. And so I'll be taking them out of the egg turner so you can kind of see day 18 down there and the differences in the eggs there for sure. So you see day 13 is just not quite as dark, which is why some of them that I was unsure about I went ahead and kept, but day 14 is definitely a lot darker. And you can see here based on the chart there's a big difference between like day 10 and as you just progress just within those next few days. So if ever in doubt, like you could look at some of the eggs and say, okay, well maybe those are on like these stages, and it's acceptable too. If you're not sure, you can just keep them in there, especially when they're close together. But I started all of these at the same time, and they were all laid within a day or two of each other. So I know that it's very unlikely that any of them are going to have progressed a lot further than the others. And so for me, I'm just throwing out what I feel like throwing out, but I don't expect everyone to do that. And I definitely want to just remind you that if you're new to this and you're not sure, just keep them in a little bit longer. Colored egg layers has significantly decreased as they've aged and because we've added more chickens to the flock. But yeah, we didn't end up with a ton of eggs. I ended up with 8 that looked like they were doing really well, which does happen. But last time I had a lot more. And so this is kind of the watering chamber here. It's different. It's not kind of, it's definitely the watering area. But so what happens is during this stage for this particular incubator, you pour water into this middle part right here and then close it, and then it instructs you to keep this little vent open. And then it should be about 50 to 55%. I like to keep mine at 55, just so that if I'm away or working or doing something and the humidity drops a little bit, I have a little bit of leeway. But I just pour water into this one, but sometimes when you close it, the water will spill over here. So you just got to make sure, because if you fill up this whole tray, the humidity will start increasing to around 60 or so. And then it also has an area, so if during hatch the humidity is not high enough, I can add water to this part right up front, and then there's another part that looks like that in the very back here too, that raises the humidity for when it's time to hatch. And so this right here, it's fallen down a bit, but I can pull it back just to show you. There we go. Sorry, it's a little blurry. But that is a thermometer. So this thermometer we've had for so long. My parents actually used it to measure the temperature in a fish tank way back in the day. And so you can see, monitor the temperature, but I know the temperature in here is pretty accurate, but this is just to make me feel a little bit better. You can put different types of thermometers that you like in here, and the Chick Cozy does come with some guidelines and a pamphlet that tells you about the different eggs, the humidity, temperature, and what kind of thermometers you can set in here, so that can help you out a lot. One thing that I've learned today is that it looks like it is time for me to start rotating my flock. I do have 14, 15, 18 chicks that are about 2 weeks old, and then I do have 3 chicks that are about 2.5 to 3 months old. And so I do have some chickens that I'm raising up to be next year's flock. I'm not sure how many are going to be hens, but unfortunately it's just about that time that if I'm not gonna cycle through my chickens, then I probably need to stop incubating some of these eggs and focus on incubating the eggs only from the younger hens. So you learn from my mistake about rotating your flock. If you're gonna keep older layers, this may be something you're experiencing. If you're only gonna keep one rooster for a large number of hens, it could also impact your fertility rate, especially if your rooster's aging. My rooster's older than all of my hens, so boy is probably out of his prime at this point, but he's such a good rooster for protecting the hens, and we do live in the country, so I do worry about bringing in another rooster and getting rid of him just because he is such a good protector. But that is something you have to consider depending on what your goals for your flock is, if that's hatching, if it's sustainability. There's just a lot of factors that go into it. So thank you guys for watching me candle all of my eggs, for listening to me ramble on and talk about my flock and my eggs. If you have any questions or comments, feel free. I enjoy the interaction. I love seeing like what works for everyone else, what everyone else does. Any extra tips you can give people always really help out. So thanks again, guys.